Hello and welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West, the show where American grit meets British backbone. Across America, the Stars and Stripes flies from porches in schools on pickup trucks. To all but most extreme lefties, it's a unifying symbol. In Britain, apparently it's now toxic to fly the Union Jack. The very act of flying it is negative. That's certainly the view of ex-England footballer Gary Neville, after Patriots up and down the UK started to fly the flag once again on lampposts and front doors. Let's hear what he had to say.
I just kept thinking as I was driving home last night that we're all being turned on each other, and the division that's being created is absolutely disgusting. Mainly created by angry, middle-aged white men who know exactly what they're doing. Funnily enough, on one of my development sites last week, there was a Union Jack flag put up, and I took it down instantly. But I've been building in this city for 15, 20 years, and there's no one put a Union Jack flag up in the last 15 to 20 years, so why do you need to put one up now? Because quite clearly it's sending a message to everybody that there is something you don't like. The Union Jack flag being used in a negative fashion is not right.
In the aftermath of last week's Manchester terror attack, according to the multi-millionaire TV pundit Gary there, the problem isn't jihadists who are literally called jihad, but it's the angry middle-aged white men sowing division in society. And shockingly, even government ministers have publicly agreed with him. Tonight, when did loving your country become a hate crime? Since when did pride turn to prejudice? And if we can't stand in front of our flag, then what is left to unite us at all? And while Britain bickers, how united is America really, as the White House goes on the attack against what they're calling a rise in domestic terrorism? Joining me in the studio for tonight's show, editor of the National Pulse, Raheem Kassam. Raheem Kassam, you are a Brit who's been in America for near on a decade now. Well, give us your reflection on the difference, just on that flag. It's just such a perfect example of how separate these two countries are going, isn't it?
Yeah, Harry, thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Effectively, they're talking about you.
Yeah.
Middle-class white men.
Wow, okay, all right.
I feel like I should be interviewing you at this point.
I am a hate crime, apparently.
You know what's funny is when I first started coming to America, one of the things that really struck me is you used to land into Dulles International Airport here in Washington, D.C. You walk out of the entrance and immediately it's a sea of American flags, designed intentionally to be that way. All around downtown Washington, D.C., not far from where we are right now. I would navigate the city because there was a big Burberry store with a big British flag on it. There was a big American flag hanging on Connecticut Avenue. And they don't see it as a political symbol necessarily. A little bit against us maybe, right?
Yeah, but they'll get over it eventually. 250 years, yeah.
But the amount of pride that they take with their flag, the broader emblems of America, is something not only have we now lost in the United Kingdom, but actually we're now demonising. As a Manchester United fan...
Yes, well, that was what I was about to say. What do you make of Gary Neville there? The new political pundit of the left. I mean, it's a pretty moronic thing to say.
It makes me feel sick that I have supported this man over the years when he says such stupid and asinine and offensive things. But I can't help but think that despite the agreement from some Labour politicians, he is finding his way into becoming the new Gary Lineker.
Well, we saw how that ended with Gary Lineker, who was forced out of the BBC after an anti-Semitism crisis. Raheem, stay there. We're joined by friend of the show, Adam Brooks, all the way from Essex in the United Kingdom. Adam, commentator, campaigner extraordinaire. Another hate crime to add to the list, right? By the time we get back to the United Kingdom, you're all going to be banged up for flying the flag next, right?
I'll be shocked if I'm not banged up under this government. But look, it's just another Labour activist. And a lot of people don't know that, Gary Neville is a Labour activist. He helped put this government in. Money has gone to his head. He's forgotten where he's come from. And to say, I cannot believe he's admitted that. He's gone to one of his building sites, one of his big development sites, and he's taken the Union flag down. The builders and the workers there must think he's a right idiot. They really must do. I know a few ex-Premier League footballers that think he's an idiot as well. How have we got here, Harry? I really don't know. How can our flag be insulting to some? How can our flag, us putting it out there, us signalling our patriotism, how can that be divisive? At the end of the day, what I tell you is divisive is dumping tens of thousands of unverified, unchecked foreign men into areas like Epping, where I campaign, and seeing 14-year-old girls sexually assaulted and women sexually assaulted as well. That's divisive. And that is what we are pushing back for. Remember, a lot of these campaigns came from Epping. We started this sort of pushback, and thank God that the rest of the country is pushing back now as well. We're not racist. We're not far right. We are just sticking up for our communities. And people like Gary Neville saying things like this, you know, a champagne socialist, far removed from everyday people, Harry.
Do you think there's a bit of snobbery in this? The Raise the Flag movement has gone up across working class areas, across majority, mostly in England. It's the first time we've seen a sort of outpouring of open and overt patriotism organically across the country, but it is mostly in working class areas. Do you think people like millionaires like Gary Neville, is it snobbery? Am I being too unfair on him?
It is. Money, as I said, money's gone to his head. He's forgotten where he's come from. He's not just a millionaire, Harry. Let's be truthful now. He's worth tens of millions of pounds. And what I've said earlier in the week when this broke is that if and when society breaks down because of governments like we've got now, and we're filled with illegal immigrants in our towns, and there's trouble, there's sexual assaults, people like Gary Neville can just sod off. They can go to another country, they can move their family easily with what they've got. They do not face the problems that people like us face in our towns, Harry. And that is where he's so far removed. Some of the videos that I've been in regarding Gary over the last day or two have had millions of views. And for me, that signals that people are sharing it on WhatsApp. They've had enough. White Van Man feels real let down by the comments that Gary Neville said. Just because he's played football does not make him more patriotic than someone that's got a white van and a Union flag or a St George's cross on their van.
Adam, stay there. Raheem Kassam, you're nodding along. You're nodding along there.
I think sod off is the best way of putting it, and here's why. Because people like Gary Neville are sowing open division.
Oh, there we go.
Off. Here's what occurs to me. Adam asked the question, how can it be divisive? How can the flag be divisive? I'll tell you how. Because symbols of unity are necessarily divisive by those trying to divide us. Multiculturalism isn't the philosophy of one nation and one people. Multiculturalism is a philosophy of division and apartness and otherness and ghettoization. And that's how that symbol can end up there.
Adam, the other flag we see a lot in the United Kingdom, day in, day out, is the Palestinian flag. It does seem to me that there's a section of society that are more offended by the Union Jack than seeing the flag directly associated with the horrors of October 7th and what's going on in the Middle East. Seas of them across London. Can I believe, is it true, I am baffled, that there is actually going to be a protest tomorrow in London, a pro-Gaza, anti-Israel protest on October the 7th, 2 years after the massacre, and the police are going to allow that to go ahead?
I believe so. From what I've seen on social media, I've also seen many university campuses having these so-called, they're almost like celebrations on this day as well. Now, over the last 3 or 4 days, we have seen some sick and deranged behaviour from these lefties and these pro-Palestinian marches, some awful anti-Semitism. And I would say that that's more dividing society than middle-aged white men like myself that Gary seems to have a problem with. Let's also remember, it isn't white middle-aged men in this country that are killing people in cold blood outside synagogues or committing terrorist atrocities. I think his words were so divisive, and I believe he may be regretting what he said. Someone told me he's deleted the video. I can't verify that, but I would think he's regretting his words now because he's made himself look like a right plonker, and he has alienated so many people. Look, we're still going to watch Sky Sports, we're still going to watch the football, but it doesn't mean that we like listening to this I'm going to call him an idiot, because he has acted like a complete idiot, Harry.
Or you could just turn over to our friends at TalkSport. Much easier. You don't have to listen to Gary Lineker or indeed Gary Neville. Adam, one more question while I've got you here tonight, and thank you again for joining us. There does seem to be some action coming out, certainly talk coming out of the government. They seem to have woken up slightly. The Home Secretary seems to have woken up slightly to the fact these cumulative effects of these protests, especially the pro-Gaza ones. Weekend in, weekend out, going down to the same places, marching down the same spots. Are you worried that sort of clampdown on protests on the left is going to bring some of the stuff that you are doing to raise awareness of Epping and the hotels? Are you worried that you're going to be sort of thrown out and swept up in that?
100%. I think they was waiting for something like this to enact stricter protest laws on people like myself and those outside the Bell Hotel. We are an inconvenience, even though we are sticking up for our communities, young girls being sexually assaulted. You cannot make us wrong. Yet we've had hate marches in London, and some of this anti-Semitism is disgusting. So where is the condemnation of the 500 arrests from Sadiq Khan and Mahmoud? Where is that? And Keir Starmer. Yet on the United Kingdom rally, there was 26 arrests. 99.9% of people behaved. It was a carnival atmosphere, and yet he was stood there, our Prime Minister, giving a big statement. Where are the statements about what we see the other night? On Thursday, the day of the synagogue events, there was people in train stations, acting and being terrible, really. And there's been no condemnation from the leaders of our country. So I think that proves we're living in two-tier Britain, Harry.
But final question, is the sick scenes of hatred, the police say they're powerless to stop it, ministers say they're powerless to stop it because the right to protest, is that worth the price to pay for you to be able to protest? And I'm not accusing you in any way of using the similar tactics or awful scenes, but your right to protest, needs to be protected as much as anyone else's.
100%. Look, it's a democratic right to protest. But we cannot complain if we preach hate. We don't preach hate in Epping. We've got the Pink Ladies. I'm going on a protest tomorrow in Tower Hamlets because of their behaviour with the Pink Ladies. But there's a line between celebrating terrorism and pushing back against sexual assaults in your town. We must protect the democratic right to protest. But this government, I believe, are going to twist this and use it on people like me and the people of Epping, rather than the left that they seem to protect at every possible time.
Adam Brooks, thank you for joining us on Harry Kell Saves the West. See you again soon, and all power to your elbow. Raheem Kassam, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, one of your favourite people, I'm sure, has described the idea of protesting against Israel tomorrow on October the 7th as un-British. That's sort of trying to put the horse back in the stable after, I'm mangling my metaphor here, but that horse has bolted, right? These protests are already pretty offensive, right?
I think the protesters would actually like to be called un-British. These are people who don't necessarily identify as British in the way that we know it anyway. So that kind of rhetoric does nothing. People will start believing Keir Starmer's words when he starts revoking the visas of and deporting people who aren't in line with his idea of what is tolerable in that sense. That's what President Trump is doing with the people who are in America on those lines. And there is no greater transatlantic show as this one. That's the sort of thing that we need to be talking about. Where are the best practices from the US that the British government needs to be implementing now?
I mean, we've talked about this at length. The fact is that Keir Starmer and Donald Trump 2.0 have been in power not a dissimilar amount of time. One of them is facing record migration across the channel, illegal migration across the channel this year. One of them's got capture and release down to zero. Got control over the border. Without, however, the restraints of the legal restraints that Britain has boxed itself in with various treaties and what, there's not a huge amount that Keir Starmer can do, really, is there?
Well, what's going to happen if you break the treaties?
Well, there we go.
No, honestly, we always talk about this. Oh, we can't because of ECHR and whatever. Well, let's do it and see what they want to do in response. Because I bet you they're a paper tiger, and I bet you nothing will actually happen. Most governments across Europe are facing similar problems right now. And if somebody chooses to lead the way, the Europhiles are always talking about Britain leading in Europe. Okay, so lead in Europe on this issue.
All right, well, listen, let's broaden this out a little bit. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the horrific scenes of October 7th. Now, indirect talks between Israel and Hamas have been taking place today in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt under that Donald Trump drafted 20-point peace plan. Now, Hamas have accepted some of the terms, but not all. The president is demanding negotiators move fast, warning that failure will mean massive amounts of more bloodshed. As the conflict reaches its second anniversary, as I say, tomorrow, we're joined by the Daily Signal's Virginia Allen to discuss it all. Virginia, you were at the White House today. There was an update and various sort of behind-the-scenes hints about what's going on. Bring our listeners and our viewers up to speed on exactly where we are with the Trump peace plan.
It's a really big day in Washington, D.C., and certainly in Egypt, where those talks are taking place. You have negotiators from the United States, from Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt all gathered to negotiate the details of this peace plan between Hamas and Israel. And really, this is one of those things where I think everyone fears that the devil is indeed in the details. Details is the word that Hamas used when they accepted this proposed peace plan and said, yes, we will agree to release all the hostages, but we need to discuss details. Well, of course, there are hopes and there's a lot of optimism that indeed we will see those nearly 50 hostages, 20 of whom are believed to still be alive, released as soon as this week, of course, with tomorrow being the 2-year anniversary of the horrific October 7th terrorist attack on Israel that left 1,200 people dead. What a powerful, powerful image to see those remaining hostages come home this week as we remember those who lost their lives and were taken hostage. And yet, I do think there remains a lot of hesitation. Both we're seeing that from the administration, from policy experts, from those who have dedicated their lives to covering foreign policy. Everyone is cautiously optimistic. No one is celebrating yet because Hamas is so highly unpredictable. And Hamas, at the end of the day, is only concerned about Hamas.
On the 20-point plan, obviously there was that statement released by Hamas late last week, which said they would release the hostages when the Israeli Defense Forces moved to a certain point, as the top of that deal suggests. Now, Donald Trump came out over the weekend, said this was great news. They've signed up. Hamas has signed up. There's reports this morning that he had quite an intemperate phone call with Netanyahu over the weekend, where he suggested that the Israeli PM was, I won't say the full phrase, but was something negative. But the truth is that Hamas are picking and choosing from those 20 points. At no point have they confirmed the most important part after releasing the hostages is a Gaza free of Hamas. Mm-hmm. Is that still the aim of the administration here to seek that, or is this going to end up being an eternal fudge?
It certainly, I think, remains a key priority for the administration because there's a recognition that if Hamas is allowed to maintain power, it would just be a matter of time before they were back at a level and a strength and a capability able to carry out another October 7th. I mean, you think about the situation in Gaza and you think about the devastation that is real there of just a war-torn community, a community without a lot of opportunities for young people. Those are the perfect environments for terrorism to grow, for Hamas to go out, those that remain, recruit new fighters, and over time rebuild strength. So that's why that complete disarmament of Hamas is absolutely critical. And I think more than the U.S., we've seen, this is something that Netanyahu and Israel as a whole, the Israeli government, is not willing to bend on. They recognize the fact that it is completely unacceptable to their national security for any part of Hamas to remain intact. And, it's been that big question mark this whole time over the past 2 years. Is it possible to achieve both, to ensure that Hamas is completely destroyed and get the hostages home, especially those who are alive, get them home while they are still alive? And I think in many ways that still remains a huge question mark today. We have a little more hope, but certainly Israel, even more than the U.S., is very really set on ensuring that Hamas maintains no power, no authority. And this plan, I will say, it's quite generous to Hamas
No, it is.
allow them to even leave if they want to, if they're willing to lay down their arms. They don't have to stay in Gaza.
And 2,000 prisoners released for 48 hostages. And, Hamas leadership, or what's left of the Hamas leadership, they've been wiped out 3 times already, essentially able to skip into the Qatari sunset and escape justice for their crimes. Massively unpalatable deal for the Israeli side to swallow. Look, there's a lot of hope and thumbs up and noise out of the White House at the moment. They're optimistic about this. What are they saying privately, finally, but while we've got you, Virginia, on how long this is actually going to take? Days, weeks, months, is it even going to be complete in time for that crucial December discussions about this year's Nobel Peace Prize?
Yeah, well, so we're seeing pretty consistent verbiage across that line that it's going to be several days or a few days of negotiations. I think the big question mark is, has there been kind of a mental red line that the president himself maybe has drawn to say, all right, I'm willing to let negotiations go for 4 or 5 days, and then I'm not going to put up with Hamas's details, essentially, and we're going to take some serious action. And I do think that it will take that pressure for Hamas to realize, okay, we can't play games, because the only language that they speak truly is a language of action. And it's not enough. They're going to try and drag out these negotiations for as long as they possibly can.
All right, the Daily Signal's Virginia Allen there with all the latest on the talk. Still with me is Raheem Kassam. Raheem, it does strike to me that the president's kind of losing his patience on this one. He just wants this done. It's taking up too much global bandwidth. He hasn't made a massive amount of progress with Putin and the Ukrainian thing. He does feel to me that he seems to think he can get this one sorted far quicker.
Yeah, it's almost like it's the Middle East conflict or something. It's been going in this.
As he says, this for 3,000 years, and he's the one to fix it.
Right, and the idea. I mean, look, I think a lot of the talking points, not of Virginia's, by the way, who was wonderful on this, but I think a lot of the broader talking points around this sort of thing are asinine. The idea that Hamas is going to skip off into the sunset, and there isn't going to be some residual terror faction that remains in Gaza, in the region, funded by Iran, and so on and so forth. Obvious, right? Negotiating with Hamas is about 1,000 times harder than negotiating with the Taliban. Okay, and that was already, and it continues to be very difficult. The realpolitik of this all is actually what do we want Gaza ending up being? Because I think you can end up with between 13 and 18 of these points being achieved that the president has set out to achieve. But on the critical parts, you're not going to get agreement, and therefore there will still be friction. I think you have to have a more forward-looking plan, a futuristic plan about what that region needs to look like, and sell that to the local people. There is a reason they haven't voluntarily toppled Hamas, because the Western world has been a little bit too shy about telling them, hey, look at all the prosperity that might befall you if you get rid of this terror faction from your governance.
This is the sort of Jared Kushner, Tony Blair, Riviera, rebuild. This could be it could be the next UAE, it could be the next, Dubai. How possible is it when, the Palestinian people, the Gazan people are living under a terrorist organisation. They are living. There's video footage of them literally being shot in the street for criticising them. It's a sort of catch-22 situation. So they can't rise up because they're essentially, impossible to do. So how do you reach the Gazan people? By bypassing Hamas?
I don't know. I don't know about impossible, right? But there's certainly been a level of weakness on the Western side. I mean, look at Iran. Take Iran as an example. Every time the Iranian people finally get their stuff together to try and overthrow the regime, the West ends up a little short of that, right? And are afraid of the long-term ramifications.
Well, what Donald Trump used to call forever wars, right? Doesn't want to get the West dragged into these sort of things.
But honestly, if I were Donald Trump, I would say the same thing to the Palestinian people as he once said to black Americans. He said, what do you have to lose? Right? At this point, you've been voting the same way, you've been trying the same thing for so long, and the conditions of your life are not improving. What do you have to lose?
Yeah. Interesting, man. You're a keen criminologist of this organisation. It does seem to me that the president is bringing in sort of voices and expertise that are sort of entirely bypassing the State Department at the moment. So Steve Witkoff is obviously his envoy around the Middle East, and he's doing a lot of the heavy lifting on Ukraine and Putin. And Jared Kushner obviously has been brought in to lead on this particular deal. Where does that leave Marco Rubio, who seems to be sort of picking up every other job going, other than actually being the Secretary of State?
I don't know. I mean, Marco Rubio is doing a wonderful job all the world round, quite frankly, for the United States. This particular thing does take more people, it does take more actors. Here's why. Because President Trump understands what I just described, that there has been a Western intransigence for decades upon decades, and that lives and breathes in the State Department. It lives and breathes in the bureaucrats that are still there in a lot of senses, that still want to perpetuate policies, say things like two-state solution, but what never ends up getting anywhere, right? That's what you're fighting against, and that's why it was imperative that President Trump brought in external actors.
So he's sort of hacking the system, bypassing the deep state to actually get stuff done.
Perfectly said.
Oh, indeed. All right, don't go anywhere. After the break, we're back onto our favourite subject, as ever, immigration. And the war on it is turning deadly. Has anti-ICE rhetoric gone too far? We'll break that down with our guests after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Remember, for all that great exclusive content, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Harry Cole Saves the West. Just find it there. Now, they said defund immigration and customs enforcement. They said abolish borders. And now violent attacks are following. In Chicago, we saw a driver slam into an ICE vehicle. Portland's ICE centre is under fire nightly from protests. And across the country, the Homeland Security Department has deployed special operations after multiple violent attacks on their federal agents. They're calling it domestic violent extremism. Raheem Kassam from the National Pulse is still with me. What's going on? This is, this seems to be taking protest into a different level.
Yeah, and before we get going, I want to say, I subscribe to Harry Cole Saves the West on YouTube.
Well, we get very good. Very good. Raheem Kassam also has a YouTube channel. Look at this, an outbreak of unity.
I actually do consume the content a lot, and it's fantastic. And well done to you for hitting the ground running here. What is really interesting to me about what's going on with ICE at the moment is you have a federally funded agency which gets its powers from the United States Congress, which is now actually doing their job out in the streets, getting rid of illegal immigrants in the United States, which is part and parcel of their the whole framework of the way the immigration system works. Everybody knows that. Even when you come into the country illegally, you understand that there is a system by which if you get caught, you are leaving. And what is the political left's response to this? It has been targeting these ICE agents and their families and their homes. It has been trying to dox them and their children. It has been assaulting and harassing them in the streets. There is all this strange Baader-Meinhof style leftism now in America that's sprung up overnight. And what I want to know is this: how could that possibly be organic? How could that possibly be grassroots? Or who and where are the networks that are actually funding this? And where are the Republicans in targeting those people for prosecution?
Well, there's one man in the White House who seems to be declaring. That's Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Let's see what he had to say this afternoon.
When you have ICE officers who are carrying out the statutes and laws of the United States to arrest and remove illegal aliens, who are being subjected to violent attacks in the conduct of their duties. That's an example of illegitimate violence, illegitimate power in the form of domestic terrorism being used to impede the conduct of their official duties. The answer to that, in a civilized, modern, civilized society, is to use legitimate state power, grand juries, subpoenas, arrest warrants, search warrants, and every other federal power at the disposal of the commander-in-chief to identify and find everybody who is trying to use the real and actual threat of violence to impede the conduct of these federal responsibilities and ensure that they're placed behind bars. So it's the broader spectrum of political violence, but obviously ICE as an agency has been subjected to a 9-month effort to substitute left-wing violence for the votes of the American people. No federal officer in the conduct of their duties should have to worry about being physically attacked, being physically obstructed, being physically impeded, being doxxed, having a bounty put on them. And the fact that Democrat politicians are trying to normalize this really indicates how far we've gone as a society, that there is not universal condemnation of this organized campaign of violence against ICE officers.
Raheem Kassam, is there politics coming into this? Obviously, these are Democrat cities that the administration is threatening to send in the National Guard to. It's never far away from the divisions. As Stephen Miller says, they're almost trying to replace the election result on the streets. How much of this is being politicised, and how is the threat being jacked up a little bit to flush out the Democrats?
Well, look, remember, last time President Trump served a term, they tried to delegitimize his administration using lawfare, using the Russia hoax, all of that stuff. This time they're doing something completely different. This time they're taking to the streets, and they're taking to the streets in a remarkably swift and organized way to undo what the election results were, effectively, to try and delegitimize the government's credibility that only was elected last year, that only took power at the beginning of this year, that is only less than a year into this stuff. I mean, they're talking already about having had at least 500,000 people deported out of this country in that period of time. That is a massive undertaking. It's massive for the government. It's massive for what people expected this government to do. They are reaching expectations, if not surpassing them at the moment. And that is, again, something that the British government should perhaps be looking to. I think, I hadn't seen that Stephen Miller clip.
Well, you were hitting the same. You were hitting your talking points there, weren't we?
But we talk about the same things day in and day out. That's why it sounds like we're telegraphing each other right now in real time. These problems on American streets are not going to go. You're not going to placate these people. They're not there for a kumbaya moment. They killed my friend Charlie Kirk because of that. Right? For the same reasons, for the same rationale, for the same fact that they still can't believe they lost the last election. When Biden was in office, he said that the reason he couldn't close the borders is because the Congress hadn't passed enough cash into the hands of ICE. There hasn't been a single cent more. They're currently using the same budget that Biden had, and yet there are 0 illegal border crossings today. Think about what the left must be going through internally, and that starts to explain this insanity you're seeing in American streets.
Raheem Kassam, stay there. We're going to bring in Art Arthur from the Centre for... I've lost it now. From the Centre for Immigration Studies. Sorry, Art. Thank you for joining us on Harry Cole Saves the West. Raheem Kassam there making the point that the left of the United States is almost in free fall, still not able to put together a proper resistance on the Hill. And so the resistance to this administration is on the streets. Do you think that is fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what's going on right now. We have a political party that opposes immigration enforcement by and large, that's not able to pass any legislation, and that honestly isn't able to give any good reasons why the largest border influx in American history over the past 4 years ever happened. But I think you have a large number of people who believe that America is so faulted, so flawed, so degraded. And that its immigration laws are, discriminatory against any and all who want to come to this country. And so they're voicing that in anger, in violence at facilities. We saw it, in Dallas, Texas. We saw it in, the Alvarado detention facility in Texas. We've seen it in the streets of Los Angeles and Chicago. So, they're angry that the laws that the American people have passed are being enforced. They don't think those laws are fair. They think they're discriminatory. They think they go back to the darkest days of American history, not just Jim Crow, but, even before that. And that they shouldn't be enforced, and that anything that they do to oppose those laws, which are being carried out by what their leaders call fascists and Nazis, should be opposed, and using all means possible.
How organised do you think this is? We're looking at some footage there now of sort of your usual blue-haired rent-a-crowd, pride flags flying at every protest crowd. And then you've also got within that the Antifa sort of helmeted, combat fatigue-wearing sort of organised militants. How organised is this? Who is organising it? And is the President and Stephen Miller right to say these are domestic terrorists?
So I think that when it comes to, who's organizing these groups, I could give you some ideas, but, I've sworn an oath of the law and I can't state anything dispositively. But right now, the Treasury Department, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has vowed that he's going to figure out where the money is coming from for all of this. In the United States, you got to have a job if you're going to support yourself. And so if you're spending weeks and months in front of an ICE facility, somebody's got to be providing you with the the helmet and all the gear and all the paraphernalia, and you got to be able to feed yourself. So the U.S. government is attempting to get to the bottom of this, but all of this took a disturbing turn this afternoon when the Department of Justice announced criminal charges against a member of the Latin Kings in Chicago who has placed bounties on the heads of our ICE officers, $10,000 for their lives, $2,000 for their abduction. That money's got to be coming from someplace. And the U.S. government's going to get to the bottom of that. Expect this to be the first of many indictments and complaints to follow.
I mean, that is a shocking development in terms of political violence, as we've discussed. Where do you fear this is going to go? Have the government got in front of this quick enough, or are we going to see these scenes escalate and play out unless something is done urgently, not least in Chicago, not least in Portland?
So when we talk about Portland, we talk about Chicago. Governor Kotek of Oregon, Mayor Johnson of Chicago, Governor Pritzker of Illinois, they own this now. Any violence that comes out of this, any blood that's shed either by passersby, by ICE officers, or as we saw in Dallas, by migrants themselves, is going to be on their hands, and they're going to pay a political price for that. The American people like law and order. We like to see our laws enforced. And, in polling after polling, especially from Harvard-Harris, hardly right-wing outlet, about 3/4 of Americans believe that criminal aliens who are here illegally should be removed from the United States. This isn't a 60-40 issue. This is a 75-25 issue. And any bloodshed, any violence that comes out of this is going to be on the heads of the people who are promoting it, who are calling ICE officers Nazis, and who are impeding enforcement.
We've got the Democrat mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, signing executive orders creating ICE-free zones. Not only does that presumably hamper the actual sort of job of deporting criminals and deporting illegals, but also, as you say, completely out of touch with public opinion. Not only dangerous, but also dumb politics, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely dumb politics. And for what it's worth, it's dumb law. In the early 19th century, Justice John Marshall, the great Chief Justice, issued a decision in McCullough versus Maryland that said you can't place restrictions on the federal government when they're engaged in federal government activities. Brandon Johnson pretend that these people, that he can, do something much the same way that Gavin Newsom claimed that he could take the masks off ICE officers, but he can't. He just can't under our laws. But more importantly, ICE wouldn't have to be out there on the streets picking up criminals if Mayor Johnson, Governor Pritzker, Governor Newsom, Governor Kotek would simply allow them into their prisons to pick up criminals there. All ICE wants to do is arrest criminals. They're the ones who are standing in the way of it. I think that this is going to go to a Supreme Court decision, and I think that those local and state officials are going to get a rude wake-up call.
Arthur, thank you. Well, I've got you one final question. There's growing calls in the United Kingdom for creation, for opposition parties are calling for creation of their own ICE units. What do you think that would, is that something that America could sort of export globally? And is that sort of power that Donald Trump's deploying on the streets, something that Americans should be proud of?
Yes, actually, I think it is. I was one of the people that helped draft the law that created ICE. It is a continuance of immigration enforcement in this country that goes back 100 years. I'm a little astounded that the United Kingdom doesn't have a similar law enforcement agency. I assume that you probably have plenty of people working for Inland Revenue that are collecting taxes. As important as it is to collect taxes, it's as important to enforce your immigration laws. Without immigration enforcement, you don't have sovereignty, you don't have borders, and you don't have a nation.
Arthur, thank you for joining us on Harry Kells Saves the West. Come back and see us soon. Thank you. Raheem, ICE, splits opinion, right? But Priti Patel, in a Conservative Party conference speech either today or I've just broken an embargo tomorrow, is calling for the formation of British ICE. It's always become a sort of totemic issue in Western countries that, finally someone's doing something. And as you just said earlier, the left are going so crazy because it's working, right?
Yeah, and just speaking of the Inland Revenue, I think if Democrat politicians want to declare ICE-free zones, then Republicans should declare IRS-free zones and see how they like that one. Look, it is imperative, whoever the next government is in the United Kingdom, that they are able to hit the ground running with this issue. We know the Labour Party currently isn't going to do it. They don't want to do it. It fundamentally works against them to do it, and it works against what their base wants and elected them for. But whether it's the Reform Party or the Tory Party, I don't know. I've seen some of the scenes from the conference. It doesn't look like it's going to be the Tory Party. They have to have a constitutionally based, we don't use that term a lot in British politics, but we have one, it's a living one, a constitutionally based method of getting rid of these people from the country. Again, to turn around to the ECHR and go, look, do your worst, we're running the country now. Remember we left it.
I think your mate Giorgia Meloni would say the same in Italy. I think the Austrians are certainly making noise about the ECHR. The French have been ignoring the ECHR for years, and it's only us, sort of silly Brits that seem to be taking this incredibly seriously. The UK does have, the Home Office does have immigration enforcement. So, they got into trouble for driving vans around certain communities, suggesting that people grassed on their neighbours. That seems remarkably tame. What was that, 10, 15 years ago? And imagine the noise and row about that, tenfold or 20-fold, 100-fold, when masked men are kicking down doors, ICE style. Do you think Britain is ready for ICE?
Yeah, well, you know what?
British public might be.
You know what? Not to raise the tone, but perhaps if we had listened to Enoch Powell in his 1968 speech.
I thought you were going to get plugged to your book in a controversial book. It has to be said. Yes, but I mean, I was amazed.
I'd be surprised if you read it.
Michael Fabricant, a former Tory MP, not a known right-wing headbanger, making that exact point. And actually, we didn't listen to enough warnings quick enough. I mean, well, we'll cover all this and more. We're going to have to go to a break, but you're staying with us. Mm-hmm. We're going to discuss immigration again, as ever. We always do. And guess who's back in the news? Ghislaine Maxwell. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back here in a moment. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Remember, the exclusive content available only if you subscribe on my YouTube channel, Harry Cole Saves the West. I'm going to keep plugging that until you do it. Still with me this evening is Raheem Kassam, editor of the National Pulse, man about town, dandy of DC, runs a very popular MAGA watering hole, I think we're still allowed to call it. But once upon a time, you did work in Britain. You once ran, I think, for leader of UKIP. You are a close personal friend.
We all did, didn't we?
In the future, everyone will be leader of UKIP for 15 minutes. You were a close personal friend of Nigel Farage. We had a fascinating chat last week about whether Britain is ready for Farage, whether Farage is ready to be PM. We were touching there on, that immigration is going to be the third rail of British politics for some time. It's going to, it needs to be grappled. Is Farage ready to face the scale, I think, of what needs to be done in Britain? As we said, tinkering around the edges is over. Calls for a British ICE. You discuss mass deportations, not just of foreign criminals, but of illegal migrants. Stop putting them in four-star hotels. Leave organisations like the ECHR. Potentially renegotiate our relationship with the United Nations if we really want to do some of this stuff. Is he ready, and does he get it?
Well, look, and by the way, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I think the immigration thing is something that will keep coming up. And the reason I brought up Enoch in the last section is because before he gave his speech in 1968, he said, look, what I'm about to say is going to go up like a rocket into the firmament and stay there. And it has stayed there as an issue. The immigration topic has never gone away.
He later said, even despite the controversy and then he lost his job, he later said, I misunderestimated the numbers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, if we actually think about what, I'm not trying to debate the speech or its political expediency in the moment, but if we look at what was controversial of him saying then versus what is actually happening now, what is actually controversial is what's happening now. Is the open borders nature of so many Western countries? Is the way that we're giving so much away to people who actually, look, if you're like my parents and you came to be part of Britain and raise your kids as British with British values, then we're all for that.
Yeah, some of the most angry people about illegal migration are first, second, and third generation migrants to countries that played by the rules, didn't skip the queue.
And as somebody who has gone through a very lengthy and expensive immigration process in the United States also, it really grinds my gears when people come up through the southern border, knowingly criminally breaking the rules, get all of these handouts when they come to the United States, and then more than anything, get mollycoddled by politicians and mollycoddled by the left because of any number of issues, right? They want these people voting, they want them as indentured servants, and whatever they have in mind for these people. But it really grinds my gears as somebody who's done it, whose family's done it the right way twice now.
Yeah.
Look, I think in answer to your question about reform and Nigel Farage, they have until 2029, perhaps 2028.
Yeah, or even sooner if Keir Starmer carries on like he's going.
But they do need this time. They need this time to learn, they need this time to grow, they need this time to build. They need thousands of people to man government. Yep. They need hundreds of lords. They're going to need several different things tracked.
You offering your services there. Will that get you back to the United Kingdom? Lord Kassam.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you what I'll offer. Is they had a Project 2025 over here in the United States before the last election.
Yeah,
they need a Project 2029.
For our readers in the UK who are probably not quite aware of the listeners in the UK who are not quite aware of the Project 2025, just fill us in exactly what that is.
It was a plan. It was a policy and personnel plan put together externally to the Trump administration to say, look, here's what you should be doing, here's how you can do it. It was a tome. It was 600 A4 pages back and forth, right? It was absolutely massive. And the left freaked out over it. Why? Not because it was necessarily controversial, because it was so detailed.
We talk about what needs to be done around, for Nigel Farage and reform. Legislation ready to go, bills drafted. The threat, as you say, of creating 1,000 new members of the House of Lords to ram through anything that is resisted by the detail. I just want to stick on this as Farage, the man that you know very well. You were his, aide de camp for years and years and years. You've been at his side. You know the mettle of the man.
Yep.
I've noticed a dramatic, I hate the word professionalisation, but I thought what was really interesting recently was when he had that bust up with Zia Youssef, who was the sort of party chairman at the time, who quit on the Friday, was back in his job on the Saturday. That was the first time I ever saw anyone cross Nigel Farage publicly and not be sent into the political wilderness. History is littered with people that Farage has fallen out with through UKIP, through Reform, through the Brexit Party, and the like. It does seem to me a little bit like he's gearing up. He is realising he cannot do it all. He is going to have to share the load. Is that fair?
I might reject that premise for a crude reason, and hopefully Nigel and Zia will forgive me for saying this, but none of the people he had previously fallen out with were massive party donors at the same time.
Right.
It does help.
Okay, there was my lofty, doughy-eyed vision of a man preparing for power with a weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but it's all about the money.
I think if Zia couldn't stroke a cheque for £1 million, he'd be in a very different place right now. I think that was his saving grace in that moment, because he really let a lot of people down very quickly. Like you said, threw his toys out of the pram and just said, I can't do this anymore, whatever. And when you're a major party donor, actually, whether we like it or not, political parties rely on donations, and so party leaders necessarily will make more effort that way. So I don't think that is necessarily the sign of it. What I think is the sign of it, the sign of the professionalisation, as you say, is the conference. And I was there. I went in Birmingham.
I mean, compared to the scenes we're seeing today, at Tory party conferences, it looks like a sparsely attended village fair / Women's Institute meeting with vast empty seats, and then we're going to get onto this, the sort of almost turning point vibes of the reform concert. You had the pyrotechnics, you had the disco music, you had the neon lights, you had it felt like it was some place, a party going somewhere.
Somebody turned to me during the event and said, wow, this is like a Trump rally. And I said, no, it's better than a Trump rally. Besides Andrea Jenkins singing, it was perfect.
You know both Nigel Farage and Donald Trump, and you are a keen student of the MAGA movement. Obviously, Trump, 45, Trump round one was, as we discussed earlier in the show, bit of a cluster. I'm not going to swear, because I told you weren't allowed to, so I can't. And then you've got Trump 2.0, which, he almost had 4 years in the wilderness to prepare all this stuff. How much is, when Nigel Farage and Donald Trump are speaking, how much communication is there between the teams on what needs to be done? And, that similar thing of, Trump coming in with 200 executive orders ready to go, move fast, break things, haven't got long. How much behind the scenes, advice do you think is going on?
There has naturally been a lot of shared practice over the years. I'll give you an example. You played a clip of Stephen Miller earlier on in the show. Stephen Miller used to attend and stand at the back of the room when Nigel used to come to the United States and give speeches. I know because I was the one vetting the RSVP list.
Wow.
And I would see him in the room. And I think there's even a picture of Stephen Miller with Paul Nuttall.
Paul Nuttall.
The former deputy leader of UKIP.
They look very they both look very similar.
Yeah, we call it a force multiplier. But there is that sort of osmosis effect within the movement, within the broader populist movement on both sides of the Atlantic. What there isn't at the moment, to my understanding, is a formalised back and forth amongst the teams. Now, the men will talk about this stuff. Farage and Trump talk about this stuff all the time. But the teams actually should be sitting down together and sharing best practice now.
Do you think that will happen, and who is the bridge to do it? Obviously, we've sadly lost an ambassador who sat in that chair not so long ago, Peter Mandelson. Obviously, he was a Labour appointee. There's always been this talk of Nigel Farage, being that role as bridge to the United States. Obviously, he can't do that now because every single poll in the United Kingdom would suggest that he's going to be the next Prime Minister. Who do you think is who the figure is that could, bring Nigel Farage and MAGA together?
Look, I'll say, Amy,
fancy the job?
We haven't. No, we haven't. I've been doing it, right? Like that's what I've done up to this point. No, I think there are more characters coming into play here now. Remember, who did David Cameron hire to help his political campaign in 2010? It was
Steve Hilton.
It was one of Obama's advisors.
Oh, yes, of course.
Jim Messina came over to the United Kingdom to try and help him out. I think famously lost him the Rochester by-election along the way.
One for the connoisseurs there, 2014.
Yeah. No, we're getting into it. It's important. But I think necessarily after this administration is sort of done, which is usually about halfway through an admin, people start filtering out. I think a lot of people will look around the world, and the people like perhaps Corey Lewandowski and Jason Miller and all these types will sort of look at the United Kingdom and go, right, it's time to help them out now.
Yeah, and so the sort of movement goes on. Steve Bannon's obviously, played a key role in what happened with the rise of Giorgia Meloni in Italy. He's played a key role across Europe. How do you think that will go down in the United Kingdom? Could it potentially harm reform in the polls? The Lib Dems are obviously the natural anti-Trump party. Keir Starmer obviously sucks up a lot to Donald Trump because he has to, because he's the Prime Minister of the special relationship. Do you think there's a sort of anti-Trump vibe in the UK that could harm Nigel Farage if he's seen too close?
I think certainly there's some softer Tories, some wetter Tories that might make them think twice. But what you gain, it's not even close, right? What you gain in terms of efficacy, competency, professionalisation, fundraising, ability, all of that.
Raheem Kassam, you've been brilliant. Thank you for joining us on Harry Cole Saves the West. Come again soon. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to keep saying it. Hit that subscribe button. We will see you tomorrow.